Marcus had always believed that a man's home should be a sanctuary, a place where his hard work, sweat, and sacrifices finally meant something. When he moved into Willow Creek Estates, he thought he was finally stepping into that sanctuary. The neighborhood was everything glossy brochures promised: rows of manicured lawns, white picket fences so perfect they looked fake, and houses that all carried the smug air of money. But Marcus wasn't like most of his new neighbors. He didn't flaunt his wealth with oversized SUVs or granite fountains in the front yard. What he did have, tucked quietly beneath a heavy gray cover, was an old car parked in his driveway. To the casual eye, it looked like nothing more than an abandoned hunk of metal, forgotten and wasting space. That car, however, was Marcus's most cherished possession. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a legacy. His late uncle, a man who had taught him about grit, patience, and the art of seeing value where others saw junk, had left it to him. Every scratch in the paint, every dent hidden beneath the cover told a story, and Marcus wasn't about to let it be treated like garbage. Unfortunately, the residents of Willow Creek Estates didn't see it that way. It began subtly, with sideways glances from neighbors as they walked their golden retrievers past his driveway. Whispers behind manicured hedges, little notes of disapproval tucked under his windshield wiper. Within weeks, the whispers turned into outright complaints. At the center of it all stood Diane, the president of the HOA. Diane was the kind of woman who strutted through the neighborhood like she personally owned every blade of grass. Tall, sharp-featured, and always carrying a clipboard, she had a smile that never touched her eyes. She knocked on Marcus's door one morning, accompanied by Brandon, her ever-smirking sidekick who claimed to be a legal consultant. "Mr. Hayes," Diane began, voice dripping with condescension, "your vehicle is becoming quite an issue for the community. People are saying it's an eyesore. Some even worry it lowers property values." Marcus raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "It's covered. No one can even see it." "That's precisely the problem," Brandon cut in. His smug grin widened, as if he were delivering a punchline. "A covered car suggests neglect. Abandonment. Junk. We can't have junk cluttering up this neighborhood." The word stung more than Marcus cared to admit. Junk. He looked past them toward his driveway, where the shape of his uncle's car rested under the tarp like a sleeping beast. To him, it wasn't junk. It was priceless. "I'll have you know," Marcus replied calmly, "that car is very important to me. It's not going anywhere." Diane clicked her tongue, jotting something on her clipboard. "We're issuing a formal notice. You have 2 weeks to remove the vehicle, or the HOA will arrange for it to be towed at your expense." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he didn't lash out. Years of his uncle's lessons echoed in his mind: never show your hand too early. Patience turns battles into victories. "Do what you need to," Marcus said evenly, "but don't mistake silence for weakness." Diane's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She turned on her heel, Brandon trailing after her with a chuckle that grated against Marcus's ears. Over the next days, the harassment escalated. Neighbors avoided him on the street, as though owning a covered car was contagious. Someone left an anonymous note in his mailbox reading, "Sell it for scrap already." Another neighbor complained directly during a community barbecue, loud enough for everyone to hear, that heat makes us look like a second-rate neighborhood. Marcus said nothing. He continued watering his lawn, greeting people with a polite nod, and keeping his car covered. But behind closed doors, he was planning. He was waiting for the perfect moment, because he knew something none of them did. The so-called junk car under that tarp wasn't just valuable, it was extraordinary. It was a piece of automotive history, a rare collectible so scarce that collectors would sell their own homes just to own it. And Diane, Brandon, and every single neighbor who mocked him would soon learn that the man they were treating like an outsider wasn't just another homeowner struggling to fit in. He was holding something worth more than all their luxury SUVs combined. As Marcus looked out his window that evening, watching Diane march past with her ever-present clipboard, he felt a smile tug at his lips. "They think it's junk," he muttered under his breath. "Let them think that. For now. The war had only just begun." 2 weeks. That was the deadline stamped across the bright yellow notice Diane had slapped on Marcus's front door. The paper was worded in stiff legal jargon, but its meaning was plain: remove your car or we'll remove it for you. Marcus stared at it for a long moment before tearing it down and folding it neatly. He didn't crumple it, didn't throw it in anger. He tucked it into a drawer in his study, alongside every letter and notice the HOA had sent him since he'd moved in. Evidence, neatly catalogued. His uncle had taught him that patience wasn't just about waiting, it was about watching, documenting, and striking when the time was right. Still, the pressure was building. The next morning, as Marcus left for work, he noticed a group of neighbors gathered near his driveway. Their voices dropped to whispers when they saw him, but not before he caught snippets: embarrassment, property values, should be illegal. One of them, a man named Carl with a shiny new BMW, shook his head and muttered just loud enough, "Some people just don't belong here." Marcus offered a polite nod and climbed into his truck, but his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. He wasn't angry at the gossip itself, he was angry at the arrogance. These people had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. That evening, another letter appeared in his mailbox. This one came with the official HOA letterhead and the bold signature of Brandon, the so-called legal consultant. It threatened escalating fines of $500 per day if the abandoned vehicle was not removed. At the bottom, in smaller type, it stated, "Failure to comply may result in legal action and forced removal of said property." Marcus chuckled bitterly. Legal action, he repeated to himself. Brandon wasn't even a licensed attorney, Marcus had already checked. He made a note to add that to his growing file of HOA misconduct. But the HOA wasn't content to stop at paperwork. One afternoon, Marcus returned home to find two men in fluorescent vests standing by his driveway with clipboards, measuring tapes, and a camera. "Property inspection," one of them said curtly, snapping pictures of the covered car from every angle. Marcus didn't argue, he simply filmed them back, every word, every movement, stored safely on his phone. When Diane found out he had recorded her hired inspectors, she marched back to his door, her smile stretched thin. "Mr. Hayes, your behavior is becoming combative," she scolded. "This community values cooperation, not hostility." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I'm cooperative when people act within the law. You're sending unlicensed inspectors to harass me. You might want to review your bylaws before accusing me of hostility." For a moment, Diane's mask slipped, and Marcus saw the frustration in her eyes. She didn't like being challenged. "You'll regret this stubbornness," she hissed before stalking off. The pressure didn't end there. Over the next week, Marcus found trash mysteriously dumped at the edge of his driveway. Someone smeared mud across his mailbox. Kids on bicycles were overheard chanting "junk car" as they rode past. It was petty, childish harassment, but it all came from the same source: Diane's campaign to isolate him. Through it all, Marcus remained calm. He kept his routine steady, watering his lawn, waving politely to neighbors who glared back, and quietly maintaining his car under its tarp. But beneath the calm exterior, his mind was working like clockwork. He spent evenings digging through county property records, tracing HOA filings, and reviewing every clause in the community bylaws. One night, while flipping through a stack of his uncle's old papers, Marcus found something that made him sit up straighter. A folder marked Meridian Holdings contained land deeds, leases, and corporate filings, records he hadn't paid much attention to before. As his eyes scanned the fine print, his lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. So that's how it is. For now, he kept that discovery to himself. The timing wasn't right. But it gave him a sense of quiet confidence, a reminder that he wasn't as cornered as the HOA wanted him to feel. The pressure kept building. The notices became more frequent, the fines higher. Rumors spread faster. Neighbors began avoiding him altogether, treating him like a pariah. But Marcus didn't break. He didn't bow to their demands or remove the car. Because he knew something they didn't. The so-called junk car wasn't just worth millions, it was about to become the spark that burned Diane's little empire to the ground. And when the moment came, Marcus intended to make sure everyone in Willow Creek Estates was watching. Saturday morning dawned bright and warm, the kind of day most of Willow Creek Estates spent polishing their SUVs or tending to their perfect lawns. But Marcus woke with a different plan. He had stayed quiet long enough. The HOA's constant threats, the mocking whispers, the anonymous notes calling his car junk, all of it had built to this moment. The HOA had scheduled their monthly community meeting in the clubhouse at noon. Diane, of course, would preside with her ever-present clipboard, and Brandon would smirk from the corner like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Normally, Marcus would have skipped it, preferring the peace of his porch to the hollow speeches about community standards. But not today. Today, he was going to give them a show they would never forget. When Marcus arrived, the room was already buzzing. Diane stood at the front, her voice sharp as she reminded everyone about neighborhood integrity. She barely paused when she saw Marcus enter, though her lips tightened. Brandon leaned toward her, whispering something that made them both smirk. Marcus took a seat in the back. He listened as residents raised complaints about minor issues, hedges trimmed too short, a fence that wasn't painted the right shade of beige, a child's basketball hoop left in the driveway overnight. It was pettiness disguised as governance. And then, inevitably, Diane brought up the matter of the abandoned vehicle at Lot 47. Her tone was dripping with satisfaction. This vehicle has become a symbol of neglect and noncompliance. Despite multiple notices and escalating fines, the homeowner refuses to act. As of next week, the HOA will arrange for towing and disposal. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors nodded, others looked relieved that Diane was handling the issue. Marcus let the noise die down before standing. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, silencing the room. "I'd like to address that," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. Diane's eyes gleamed. She gestured toward him with exaggerated politeness. "By all means, Mr. Hayes. We'd love to hear why you believe you're entitled to ignore community rules." Marcus walked slowly to the front of the room, his expression unreadable. "You call it junk," he began, "but have any of you actually seen it?" A few chuckles broke out. Brandon muttered, "Nobody wants to see that rust bucket." Marcus ignored him. "That car belonged to my late uncle. He taught me patience, value, and the difference between what looks worthless and what truly matters. For months, you've judged without knowing. So, let me show you." The crowd followed him outside, curious now, whispering as they trailed behind. The sun glinted off the silver tarp stretched tightly over the car in Marcus's driveway. He paused, savoring the moment. He could almost hear his uncle's voice in his ear, "Timing is everything, son. Timing makes the reveal unforgettable." With one smooth motion, Marcus pulled the cover free. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Where they expected a heap of rust sat a gleaming, scarlet masterpiece, a Ferrari 250 GTO, its curves elegant, its chrome shining like liquid fire. The paint reflected the stunned faces of the neighbors, their mouths hanging open as they recognized what they were seeing. One man stepped forward, whispering, "That can't be real." "It's real," Marcus said. "And it's worth over $2 million. Silence hung heavy in the air. Even Diane seemed frozen, her pen poised above her clipboard but unmoving. Brandon let out a weak laugh, but it died quickly when no one joined him. "This car," Marcus continued, resting a hand gently on the polished hood, "isn't junk. It's a piece of history. Collectors around the world would give anything to own it. But I kept it here, covered, because it's not just about money, it's about family. It's about legacy." The shift in the crowd was immediate. The same neighbors who had sneered at the tarp were now leaning in for a closer look, their eyes wide with awe. Phones came out, snapping pictures as though they were at a museum. Diane finally found her voice. "Valuable or not," she snapped, "the rules are the rules. A car in the driveway is still a violation." Marcus turned to her, his expression cool. "Funny. You and your board seem very concerned with appearances. But maybe you should worry less about what's parked in my driveway and more about what's written in the deeds of this community." Diane blinked, thrown off balance. Marcus didn't elaborate, not yet. He let the weight of his words hang in the air, hinting at something bigger. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension but hungry for more. Marcus gave them a polite smile. "All in good time," he said softly, tossing the tarp into the back of his truck. The meeting ended in chaos, whispers flying faster than Diane could gabble them down. But one thing was certain, the junk car was no longer an embarrassment. It was a legend. And Marcus had just turned the tables. The Ferrari reveal had shaken Willow Creek Estates to its core. For days afterward, Marcus's driveway became the neighborhood's unofficial attraction. Residents who had once mocked him now slowed their cars as they passed, craning their necks for another look. Some even stopped to take pictures, pretending they were just out for a walk. But Diane wasn't impressed. If anything, she was furious. To her, Marcus's flashy unveiling was nothing more than a stunt, a distraction from what she saw as blatant defiance of the HOA. She doubled down, sending him yet another letter, this one marked final notice. It claimed that regardless of the car's value, he was in violation of community rules, and towing was non-negotiable. Marcus read the letter at his kitchen table, then slid it into the same drawer as all the others. His file of evidence was thick now. But unlike before, he wasn't waiting passively. He was preparing for the strike. That preparation led him to the next HOA meeting. This one was more crowded than usual, word about the Ferrari had spread, and curiosity filled the air. Neighbors sat in neat rows of folding chairs, whispering excitedly. Diane stood at the front, her face tight, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. Brandon sat beside her, smirking, as if he expected to see Marcus crumble under pressure. When Diane called the meeting to order, she wasted no time. "We are here," she announced, "to address ongoing violations that threaten the harmony of our community. Specifically, Mr. Hayes' refusal to remove his vehicle. Regardless of its supposed value, rules are rules. We cannot allow special treatment." Murmurs of agreement floated through the crowd, though not as strong as before. Many had seen the Ferrari up close, and their awe had tempered their hostility. Still, Diane pressed on, her tone sharp. "This board has the authority to enforce compliance. And we will." That was Marcus's cue. He rose from his seat, a calm smile on his face. "Diane, with all due respect, your authority has limits. And it's about time this community understood exactly what those limits are." The room quieted. Even Brandon's smirk faltered. Marcus walked to the front, pulling a leather folder from under his arm. He laid it on the podium with deliberate care, flipping it open to reveal a stack of documents. "You've been so focused on appearances, Diane, that you never bothered to look at the foundation of this neighborhood." Literally. He held up a deed, its official stamp gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "This," he said, "is the original land lease agreement for Willow Creek Estates. Every lot here, every house, sits on land owned by Meridian Holdings." Diane frowned, her pen hovering above her clipboard. "What does that have to do with?" Marcus cut her off smoothly. "Meridian Holdings," he continued, "is a company founded by my late uncle. When he passed, I inherited his shares. Which means, Diane, that while you run this HOA, I own the land under your houses." Gasps echoed through the room. Neighbors turned to one another, wide-eyed. Brandon's smirk collapsed entirely, replaced by a pale look of disbelief. Diane sputtered, That's absurd. You can't possibly." Marcus slid another paper across the podium, letting it land in front of her. "Public records. County filings. All verifiable. I've owned this land since the day I moved in, and every month, this HOA pays lease fees into Meridian Holdings. My company." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. For the first time, Diane's confidence cracked. Her hands trembled as she scanned the paper. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut. So before you lecture me about compliance, remember, you've been threatening the man who owns the ground you walk on. The room erupted. Residents who had once cheered Diane now whispered furiously, some openly glaring at her. One man in the back barked, "Is this true? Have we been paying into his company all along?" Diane tried to recover, raising her voice. "This is irrelevant. The HOA operates independently." "No," Marcus said firmly. "The HOA operates on my land. And if I wanted to, I could shut this whole board down for breaching lease agreements. But I'm not here to destroy the community. I'm here to protect it from people who misuse power." Neighbors clapped. Not a polite clap, but a sharp, spontaneous one that spread until the entire room was filled with applause. Diane's face flushed red, her clipboard trembling in her hands. For the first time since moving in, Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was in control. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. The meeting after Marcus's bombshell was unlike anything Willow Creek Estates had ever seen. What was normally a dull hour of nitpicking, trash bins out too long, lawns an inch too high, had turned into a boiling storm. Neighbors who once sat silent were now demanding answers, their voices rising above Diane's desperate gavel bangs. "Is it true we've been paying fees to his company?" one resident shouted. "Have you been hiding this from us?" another snapped at Diane. Brandon tried to interject, standing tall and puffing out his chest. "Everyone, calm down. This is a legal misunderstanding. I assure you the HOA is acting within its rights." "Sit down, Brandon," Marcus cut in, his voice slicing through the chaos. He didn't shout, but the authority in his tone made the room hush. "You keep calling yourself a legal consultant, but you're not even licensed. I checked. And I've got the documentation right here." He pulled a printed record from his folder and held it up. The header clearly read, "State Bar Association, no records found." Gasps rippled across the room, followed by murmurs of anger. Brandon's face flushed crimson. That doesn't mean." "It means," Marcus interrupted again, "that every so-called legal notice you've been handing out is fraudulent. You've been impersonating an attorney to intimidate residents. That's a crime, Brandon." The room erupted again, this time with outrage aimed squarely at Brandon. He tried to protest, but his words were drowned by the growing uproar. Diane slammed her gavel against the podium, but her voice cracked as she tried to regain control. "Order! This meeting will come to order." Marcus didn't let her recover. He reached into his folder once more, pulling out a set of bank statements. "And as for you, Diane, maybe you should explain these." The papers fluttered as he spread them across the podium. Bold red numbers told the story: HOA funds transferred to Diane's personal account, disguised as administrative reimbursements. Thousands upon thousands of dollars siphoned away over the past 2 years. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then the outrage exploded. "You stole from us," a woman in the front row cried. "All those fees we pay, you pocketed them," another man shouted. Diane's composure shattered. "That's not theft. It's compensation for my time. I've kept this neighborhood running." Marcus's voice thundered over hers. "You kept this neighborhood under your thumb. You bullied residents, manipulated rules, and stole their money. And you tried to humiliate me, the one person who could see through your game." The neighbors' anger was no longer contained. Some stood, pointing fingers at Diane and Brandon, demanding their resignations. Others pulled out phones, snapping photos of the documents Marcus had laid bare. And then came the final blow. Marcus gestured toward the back of the room, where 2 men in suits had been quietly observing. "By the way, I invited a couple of guests today, reporters from the local paper. They've been recording since the meeting started." All eyes turned to the reporters, who raised their cameras and kept filming. The color drained from Diane's face. Brandon stammered, trying to block the lenses, but it was too late. The story was already captured. The HOA's carefully crafted image of order and control had collapsed in front of everyone. Residents began chanting, "Vote them out! Vote them out!" The sound filled the room, drowning out Diane's frantic pleas. Someone called for an emergency vote, and hands shot up in unanimous agreement. Within minutes, Diane was stripped of her title as HOA president. Brandon, red-faced and sweating, slunk out the side door under a barrage of glares. Marcus didn't gloat. He simply gathered his papers, slid them back into his folder, and looked around the room. "This community deserves better," he said firmly. "No more corruption. No more bullying. From here on, the HOA should serve the residents, not control them." For the first time since moving into Willow Creek Estates, Marcus saw genuine respect in his neighbor's eyes. No whispers, no sneers, just gratitude and relief. As he walked back to his seat, the room buzzing with energy, Diane collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the papers that had exposed her. She looked smaller now, her power evaporated, her clipboard lying useless on the floor. The downfall of the HOA's tyrants wasn't just complete, it was public, humiliating, and irreversible. The HOA meeting ended in chaos, but for Marcus, it marked the beginning of something new. The corrupt board that had tried to bully and humiliate him was gone, swept away in one night of revelations. Yet he knew the fight wasn't just about revenge, it was about restoring trust in a community that had been poisoned by arrogance and greed. In the days following Diane and Brandon's downfall, Willow Creek Estates felt different. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid Marcus now stopped to shake his hand. Some brought over pies or homemade meals, small tokens of gratitude. Others apologized for the months of whispers, the judgmental stares, the snide remarks. Honestly, one older gentleman admitted, "I thought that car really was junk. Shows what I know. But you handled yourself with class, son. That means something." Marcus accepted their gestures graciously but kept his focus forward. The HOA still existed, and if left unchecked, the vacuum of power could easily create another Diane. That was something he couldn't allow. At the next emergency meeting, Marcus stood before the residents, not as a victim this time, but as a leader. The community center was packed, the tension palpable. People wanted answers, a plan, and most importantly, hope. "I'm not here to run the HOA," Marcus began, his voice calm and steady. "I already own the land. I don't need a title or position to prove anything. But I do care about this community. And what we've seen is what happens when people let power go unchecked." Heads nodded. The memory of Diane's smugness and Brandon's fake authority was still fresh. "So here's what I propose," Marcus continued. "We rebuild this HOA from the ground up. Transparency in every dollar spent. Leadership chosen by all of you, not just a small clique. And every major decision will require a community vote. No more backroom deals, no more intimidation." The room broke into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine relief. For the first time, residents felt like their voices mattered. A woman raised her hand. "And what about Diane and Brandon? Are they just going to walk away?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I've already submitted the evidence of financial misconduct and impersonation to the authorities. Diane and Brandon won't be walking away from this. They'll be facing charges." Gasps rippled through the room, followed quickly by murmurs of approval. Some even smiled, clearly satisfied that justice would go beyond the neighborhood's borders. With the worst behind them, the focus shifted toward healing. Committees were formed, real ones, not the power-hungry shells Diane had created. Volunteers signed up to oversee landscaping, events, and finances. For once, people felt invested, not coerced. Marcus contributed in his own way. While he never sought a formal role, he made a quiet promise: all lease profits his company received from Willow Creek would be reinvested directly into the community. Parks, playgrounds, and even scholarships for local students, projects that gave the neighborhood pride instead of shame. The transformation was almost immediate. The same residents who once sneered at Marcus's junk car now rallied around him. Kids posed for photos next to the Ferrari, their parents laughing instead of scolding. The car that had been the center of ridicule became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. But Marcus never let them forget the lesson. At one gathering, while neighbors admired the gleaming Ferrari, he spoke softly to a small group. Value isn't always what you see on the surface. Sometimes, the most powerful things are hidden in plain sight. This car taught me that. And maybe now, it's taught all of us. The nods he received weren't just about the car. They were about respect, for him, for the truth, and for the idea that justice, no matter how long delayed, could still prevail. As summer turned into fall, Willow Creek Estates didn't just recover, it thrived. The atmosphere shifted from one of suspicion and control to one of cooperation and pride. Neighbors hosted barbecues, kids played freely in the cul-de-sacs, and the whispers that once circled Marcus were replaced by stories of how he had stood up against tyranny. For Marcus, that was the real victory. Not the exposure of Diane, not the humiliation of Brandon, not even the satisfaction of revealing his $2 million Ferrari. The victory was seeing a community finally free from fear, ready to move forward. Justice had been served, but more importantly, peace had been restored. The months after the HOA's collapse felt almost unreal. Where once the neighborhood had been a battlefield of petty rules and whispered gossip, Willow Creek Estates now hummed with laughter, cookouts, and community projects. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud was gone, replaced by something far brighter. For Marcus, life settled into a new rhythm. He still kept the Ferrari in his driveway, not to flaunt it, but because it no longer needed to be hidden. What had once been dismissed as junk was now a symbol of resilience, admired by neighbors and visitors alike. Children often pressed their noses to the car's shiny red surface, their eyes wide with wonder. Parents no longer pulled them away, they posed for pictures. But Marcus knew it wasn't really about the car. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the neighborhood in gold, Marcus sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea. The air was filled with the scent of barbecue from a few houses down. Kids played tag in the street while adults laughed in small circles on front lawns. It was simple, ordinary, and beautiful. Diane and Brandon were long gone. Diane now faced charges for financial misconduct, her once proud name dragged through the mud. Brandon, exposed as a fraud, had vanished from town altogether. The HOA had been rebuilt under new leadership, neighbors Marcus had come to trust, and now operated transparently, with regular community votes and public records. The iron grip of control had been broken, replaced with fairness. Yet Marcus's thoughts drifted to something deeper. He walked down his driveway, running his hand along the smooth lines of the Ferrari. Its engine purred when he turned the key, a sound so rich it seemed to vibrate through the street. Neighbors waved as he eased the car into motion, rolling slowly past the rows of houses. As he drove, memories surfaced, his late uncle teaching him about cars, the smell of oil and grease in the old garage, the stories of how rare this Ferrari truly was. His uncle had once said, "People will judge what they don't understand. But the wise never underestimate what looks ordinary." Marcus smiled to himself. The words rang truer than ever. When he circled back to his block, he stopped in front of the community park. It was newly renovated with funds Marcus had donated, a playground full of color and laughter, benches lined neatly along the paths, and flowers blooming where weeds once choked the soil. Parents watched their kids run free, their faces relaxed. It was a scene his uncle would have been proud to see. Marcus stepped out of the Ferrari, letting the children swarm around it. Their excitement wasn't about money or status, it was about wonder. To them, it wasn't a $2 million investment. It was magic on wheels. One boy tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Mister, is it true you own the whole neighborhood?" Marcus chuckled, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. "Not the neighborhood. Just the land under it. But you know what? Owning something doesn't mean much if you don't take care of it." The boy nodded solemnly, as if he'd been entrusted with a secret far bigger than his years. Later that night, as the stars blinked awake in the sky, Marcus returned to his porch. He looked out at Willow Creek Estates, the place where he'd been mocked, challenged, and underestimated. Now, it was a place where people smiled when they saw him, a place that thrived instead of struggled. He raised his glass in a quiet toast to the night. Funny, he murmured to himself. They called my car junk. But in the end, it wasn't the car that mattered. It was the lesson. And with that, Marcus leaned back, content. His Ferrari gleamed under the porch light, not just a symbol of wealth but of endurance, justice, and the truth that real value often hides in plain sight. The man they tried to humiliate now owned more than their block. He owned their respect.